80% of the supply chain is made up of women. There's always been abuse in the fashion and textile supply chain, so they're literally working to just survive. I'm still appalled. 150 billion new garments made every year. We just can't go on this way. I'm Godden and I am a fashion and textiles expert. I've worked all my working life in the industry. About 15 years ago I started to work in the sustainability side of fashion. I'm still appalled that not much has changed.
You often talk about our relationship with clothes as a romantic love affair, or perhaps a one-night stand even. What do you mean with that?
Very often we might have something in our wardrobe that we actually really enjoy, that might have been given to us by somebody who is special to us, or it's a dress or something that we put on special occasions that fits us really well, or we love the colour. It's something great that we have in our wardrobe that we actually might say, I love it. But the rest of our clothing is bought often in haste. If we buy from the high street, it's bought in haste and it's not looking at the big picture. So therefore the majority of our wardrobe, I would say, is fast fashion, particularly if we, as I say, we bought it from the high street, and those purchases are actually causing environmental and social degradation from which actually our planet might not recover. So it's really important that we look at each purchase and think before we buy.
What do we mean with fast fashion and the high street?
The high street, unfortunately, has been on a race to the bottom, quite frankly. It's only been driven by price and not quality. And how that started was in the 80s and really accelerated in the 90s when supermarkets got involved with clothing production and clothing sales, and they applied the same volume metrics as they did to food. In food, very often you might buy 2 for the price of 1, or you might get 1 free. So they applied that to clothing. So instead of buying 1 t-shirt, a quality t-shirt, we would get 3 for the same price, or 3 for the price of 2, and then we might not even wear 1 or 2 of those because the colours really didn't suit us. So that volume merchandising has really led to some really bad effects across the whole of the supply chain.
So what's the difference between that lack of ethos on the high street to what you would consider quality brands that you would be happy to purchase?
On the high street, it's price that dictates everything. So that means they're using the cheapest fabrics with the cheapest dye stuffs with the cheapest labour they can find. So there's been a race around the world to find the cheapest labour on the planet. And what that eventually means is that the clothing we end up with is not fit for purpose. It may last a few wears, it might come across, fall apart at the seams, the colour fades easily, and we just start to think of that clothing as old before its time, because really it doesn't look great anymore, and we've been led to believe that we should just keep buying more and more and more, and it's become less quality. So it's very often we cannot even pass that clothing on to somebody else because it's such poor quality.
So looking at the manufacturing end, what are the consequences of this?
So the consequences are that dye stuffs, the dyes that we use, which are toxic, end up going into water supplies, so rivers and streams where people are bathing and drinking that water, as well as the other toxic finishing chemicals. So the environmental impact is so great in the countries of manufacture that they are literally, their ecosystem is dying because they're manufacturing clothes.
And looking at women specifically, what is the impact? How does my purchase at Primark, for example, affect a woman somewhere?
Well, unfortunately, 80% of the supply chain is made up of women, the fashion and textile supply chain. So, and the majority of those are at the manufacturing end. So what happens is that when we purchase something that seems a bit cheaper than maybe another brand, we end up driving the price further and further down, and who suffers is the woman that's actually sewing the garment, or the woman that's actually picking cotton and making those textiles. That means that they are unable to pay their bills, so they're literally working to just survive, but they're not able to pay their bills, and they're constantly being forced to work overtime, so longer and longer hours without pay most of the time. And actually, we just can't go on this way.
We hear about women and children being locked up and working, young children working from early morning to late in the evening.
Yes, there's always been abuse in the fashion and textile supply chain, but at least when we manufactured our clothing here in Europe, we could actually see that. What happened in the 1990s is that production went out of sight, out of mind to far off countries where there is little, if no, regulation. And yes, there are still children in the fashion and textile supply chain. Yes, there is still forced labour where people's passports are removed from them, so they are unable to travel out of the countries that they have been trafficked to. The fashion and textiles industry is woven up with some of the other world's worst trafficking industries. So that forced labour issue is something that we really do need to address.
Comparing the fashion industry to other industries, how big is it?
So the fashion and textiles industry is the fourth largest in the world. So the impact is significant, but whether it's environmental degradation or human degradation, it is one that if we could just flip it and make it a positive industry, so people were paid fairly, and we had, better environmental or any environmental controls, we could actually flip it to be a really empowering industry, especially for the women that work in it. So we just need to pay a little bit more in order to have that effect.
So we're going to talk more about what we can actually do with what you have in the wardrobe there behind you, and how we can think in a more ethical way when we do our purchases. But tell me first, all of these cheap, mass-produced garments of the wrong colour, according to us, where do they end up?
So unfortunately, we now export to landfill. So we, as a country, I'm not saying that the UK is any worse, although it is significantly bad. European countries, American, the United States, Canada, China, all of these countries are overproducing as well as over-consuming clothing. So we actually have now between 120 and 150 billion new garments made every year. Now that's crazy when you think there's only 8 billion of us on the planet. So what ends up happening at their end of life is they end up on landfill sites. And because we can't cope in Europe, we'll send them to Africa, where they just lie on the beach because we think they're going to be resold and reused. They're not. They quite frankly don't have the infrastructure either. And the other big landfill site is in Chile. The Atacama Desert is one, and that's a recipient of garments not only from Europe but from the United States and also from China. And that's just lying there in the desert, and it will never biodegrade.
Is it true that you can see it from the moon?
Well, you can see it from space. I'm not sure about the moon, but definitely from space. And it's 40,000 tons a year coming into from just in one Chilean port. So yeah, it's really scary, and we've just got to stop.
So what can we do about this? Because you are working now in an ethical way to create and recycle swimwear, among other things. Tell us more about that.
So RubyMoon is a company that I started 14 years ago on International Women's Day, and we make swim and active wear from sustainable materials, and we make sure everything we make is as durable as possible so that it lasts longer, because that really is the biggest environmental impact that you can make. We also have a social impact, so we benefit women entrepreneurs in 14 developing countries with microloans so they could start and build their own business. And the reason we do that is when women have an income, they can invest on the really important things in developing countries, the really important thing for their children. So in other words, they invest in nutrition, housing and schooling that elevates the next generation. And that is when development really starts to happen, when women are involved in the decision-making part of their own lives and their community. But really, overarching all of that is the empowerment it creates for women who sometimes don't have a voice even over the rights of their own children, and it elevates their status in their own community, because people take notice of women once they start creating their own income.
So you had RubyMoon, from gym to swimwear, which is a fully operational, blossoming, wonderful fashion brand on its own. And now you've started Ruby Lab. Tell us more about that.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Ruby Lab is our initiative to create new durable materials, so textiles for the future. So basically, we are developing textiles that will be fit for the future. So not just, the next 20 years, but hopefully for 100, 150 years. We're putting in a textile system. That means all textiles can be reused over and over again in a regenerative model. And we've done that through Ruby Lab because we feel that's a standalone business that needs focus on its own.
So how is that going to work?
So we are currently looking for investment. So we're not only working on regenerated swimwear, leggings, athletic wear, cycle wear. Not only that, but we're also looking at new polyamides, which are going to be made from agricultural waste. So waste that has no use whatsoever, we're actually spinning into new textiles. And the focus is, as I said before, is durability. For me and for the circular textile industry, that really needs to be the focus. We just don't have the resources anymore to keep making new. We just have to keep recycling everything.
So often when we hear recyclable, it sounds a bit messy, smelly, used and low grade, but that's not really the concept you're talking about here, is it?
Absolutely not. And actually, when I talk about recycling, what I actually mean is upcycling. What we need to do is take materials and create things of at least the same equal value, and if not, higher value. The last thing we want to do is regenerate textiles into mattress covers and, mattress fillings. That's great if there's nothing else that can be done, but really we need to form the systems that reclaim those valuable materials again.
Amazing. So we're not looking to eat our clothes, we are looking to make them last as long as possible.
Yes.
And you feel this is possible?
Yes, we do need to extend the life cycle of our garments. That really is the biggest environmental impact that we can make. So when we buy things, we must look for the durability in those garments and know we're going to at least wear it 100 times. There's no point in buying disposable anymore or impulse buys. We have to actually think about, is this going to be good for me for a long time? And when I finish with it, for whatever reason, make sure that it goes to preferably a friend or family who will treat it and wear it as long as I have.
Shall we have a look at what's hiding in the closet?
Let's look.
Tell me what you see and what the detrimental consequences are. For example, this beautiful, shiny, very alluring golden Christmas dress that someone might pick up for a party. Tell me about it.
Yes, so just looking very quickly, I noticed it's still got the label in, which tells me this might have been an impulse buy for an occasion, for a Christmas or perhaps New Year party, and it's never been worn because someone just dashed into a shop, got it, and then when they got it home, they either put it on or just decided it wasn't quite right. So this kind of garment, we see them everywhere at Christmas. It's a sparkly number with lots of sequins, so it's made with petrochemicals, and it's unlikely that this would last very long. It's unlikely that the seams are made for it to be a classic garment that would last forever. And unfortunately, yes, this textile is going to last hundreds of years because it's made from petrochemicals, but it's going to end up in landfill most likely because of all the reasons I've just mentioned to you. So unfortunately, that would be a garment I would say to avoid if you possibly can. There are some other Christmas numbers in this wardrobe, some sort of more sparkly numbers. Again, the options to wear these are limited. I'm not saying don't ever wear sparkles or don't ever wear a Christmas dress. We all need to dress up sometimes. But what I would say is get something that you can wear repeatedly and love. I mean, I've got some clothing in my wardrobe that I really love to wear, and I get it out every Christmas, but I love it because I'm emotionally attached to it and I love it. So that's what I would say, is make sure your purchases, especially around Christmas time, are just stop and think about what you're buying.
And all the little beads on there, what is the process to get them on there, and what does that do for environment?
So I would say this is hand beaded. It looks to be hand beaded, which means someone has spent hours applying those beads, probably in bad light, which isn't helping anyone's eyesight. And yeah, again, it's a Christmas number. So someone spent hours working on this dress, and it might just end up in landfill, or it might end up in a charity shop and then in landfill. So that's the reason I would say avoid anything like that, really.
Just looking at the rest in there, what do you see?
You know, for me, there's a whole discussion going on right now about fibre wars, right? Whether synthetics are best because they're more durable, or whether we should just stick to cotton and so-called natural fibres, which aren't all that natural, to be honest with you. I don't prescribe to the fibre wars. For me, I know in this wardrobe there's going to be a percentage of clothing that's never worn, and that to me is the biggest point I would make about any wardrobe, is that our wardrobes are filled with clothes that we never wear, that we've bought, that have perpetuated this cycle of overproduction. And I would say we just need to cut our consumption. If we can cut our consumption but invest in sustainable and circular brands, that is what's going to create the system change. So instead of buying this amount of fast fashion that we're going to wear once or never. I would say let's take the money we put into that portion of the wardrobe and buy some really nice classic clothes, not fashion, stylish, well-made, beautiful clothes from sustainable or circular brands. And let's invest in ourselves, because we're not only just investing in our wardrobe, we're investing in our future and our children's future, right? Because we're not perpetuating this system, we're actually changing the system.
So people go and they have a facial for £110, but they buy 5 garments for the same price instead of spending more.
Yeah.
A facial that doesn't even last.
Yeah, and why not buy a beautifully classic jacket, you know, for that £110 rather than, as you say, 5 cheaper items, because you'll wear that again and again and you'll feel great in it. You know, it's about feeling great and actually buying clothes that fit you as well, as opposed to 5 clothes that really don't.
And knowing that you might have liberated a woman in squalor.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, by opting for better, we know that more money is invested in the supply chain. So a lot of people say to me, what about the women though, when, you know, if we take away those jobs, okay. Now, this is a relatively new phenomenon as well, right? We've only been doing this since the 90s, really, or the 80s or the 90s. So it's relatively new that we've exported our fashion trade production. Now, I would say that if you can, as well, by investing in better, you can get more money down through the supply chain. Did you know that, for instance, if we just spent 20-30 pence more, we could actually give a living wage to those women? If we actually spent 20 pence more, we could actually have decent textiles. So that just shows you we need to make those changes. And if you still want to buy from the high street, why not engage with the high street, those head offices, and say, I don't want you to give me a £1.99 t-shirt. I want to pay £2.99. I want to have decent conditions for the clothing that I purchase. I don't want to perpetuate living slavery. You know.
And that's our next campaign, right?
Could be.
We're gonna put that into action. This is just both shocking and amazing, and you're so knowledgeable about this, and it's so good that we have people like you, Jo, who are creating and making real proper change rather than just greenwashing. Tell us what greenwashing means.
So greenwashing is what's happening, or has been happening quite a bit, where brands say they're doing things to make it better, to make their supply chains better, to make, you know, oh, let's open a repair shop in our store, and actually it's fundamentally not a long-term solution to the mayhem that they've created by bringing us cheap garments in the first place.
So let me give you 3 examples, and I just want to see how you react to it and what you think about it. So the first thing is, there are companies here in Europe and in Great Britain who say they are eco-friendly and green, their products are, but everything is manufactured and shipped from China.
So this is an interesting one, because what is green and what is eco-friendly? So first of all, you have to look at each product and say, what is it first? And is it green or eco-friendly? And that's quite a lot for a consumer to analyse. But the fact that it's made in China would arouse my suspicions, first of all. Because why is that product coming from there? Could it not be made more locally with less environmental impact than all of the shipping that costs to get here? There might be some organic bamboo product that you can't get anywhere else, and as long as it's organic, I would say that makes sense. And if it's shipped by sea, you know, all of these things you have to balance out. But I'd be very suspicious about, you know, those kind of products.
Eco-friendly next day delivery.
Yeah, so if you're looking to purchase stuff online, I would say, first of all, make sure that you don't do the overnight shipping, because that really creates an individual route for your product to get to you. It's not coming with your postman who's already coming to your door. So the carbon impact of that is really significant and actually could completely ruin the impact you've made by buying a so-called eco product. So never do the courier option, always go for the Royal Mail slowest delivery you possibly can. We've lived for millions of years without overnight delivery, and unless you are in a war-torn zone waiting for anaesthetic, I would say never ever use courier.
Negative carbon footprint.
So this is an interesting one, because there's a whole lot of what I would call, this is definitely some greenwash going on here. So everything we do, everything we make, everything we eat, everything, as I say, every day we're making impact by the things we consume and do. So though there isn't really, in my mind, negative carbon impact by anything. Okay, a plant can grow and that creates some drawdown for carbon, but it's never going to be negative. So if a coffee plant has grown and we say the coffee off of it is now negative, that's actually not right. And I'm also very aware that there's carbon offsetting going on too. So we need to just be really careful about what we're calling products. Wool isn't carbon negative because it's been on a sheep grazing. That sheep still has a negative carbon impact. So I'm just really concerned about these terms, and this is why the legislation on greenwashing is so important. It's important we get that right, because consumers can't make decisions on their own. I get confused every day about new terms and what's being said, and I'm pretty much carbon literate and I know about the textile industry, but sometimes I can't keep up with what's going on and what's being said. So yeah, that's super important that we question everything.
I'm so happy we've got people like you, Jo, who put proper change, real change in place and stand up and speak about it. So thank you so much from all of us and to all women in the world. Do you want to sum this up very quickly and add anything else you want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I'd like everyone to fall in love with their clothes again. That's the most important thing. I want you to love everything in your wardrobe, and I want it to be mainly from sustainable brands, maybe a little bit of secondhand thrown in because that's great too, but it's not all secondhand because that doesn't create system change. So just think about what you buy and make sure that you're going to wear it for 100 times and just love it. That's what I would say about your wardrobe.
Good luck with your new Ruby Lab.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise today, Jo.
Thank you for the opportunity.